incredible story out of Australia is generating a whole lot of talk and interest this morning. Maybe some revulsion, too, because it involves a brain and a worm. Dr. Samir Gupta is here, an associate professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Toronto, a respirologist, of course. Good morning, Dr. Gupta.
Morning, Heather.
Boy, I appreciate when you field stories that are coming right out of left field. I'm going to just bring up CBCNews.ca because here's the headline to the story, Dr. Gupta, that was for a long time our most read. The first case of a particular parasite found in a human, and it was where and how it was found that's really causing a stir. Should we qualify this? This is definitely not a story for the squeamish this morning. We should make that clear. Okay, a patient presented with mysterious symptoms, Dr. Gupta. Tell us a little bit about what she was experiencing.
Yeah, I think a few years back, according to the report, she had presented with some gastrointestinal symptoms, so abdominal pain, diarrhea. At that time, they didn't really figure it out. Ultimately, she presented with more serious symptoms, issues with memory, issues with cognitive function, and so then they did some imaging. And they found different lesions.
Well, hold on. We'll show that. They did some imaging, and this is what came up on the MRI. That big white spot, at least how it looks to us, is that right frontal lobe, Dr. Gupta? What that would be of interest, obviously.
Right. You can't miss it, Heather. And so she had, obviously, they imaged her brain because she had these neurologic symptoms. They also imaged other parts of her body and found some lesions in the liver and the lungs. So I think the thinking was, common things being common, that she might have had a lung cancer that had spread to the liver and to the brain, and that this was some type of cancer. Another possibility would have been a conventional infection, like a bacterial infection that can spread to different parts of the body and cause, for example, abscesses. But I think the working theory was that she had cancer.
But that's not at all what the doctors described. Here's a little clip of the surgeon who went in and did some surgery on the patient's brain. And then let's just listen to this.
I took my tweezers or my tumor holding forceps and I pulled it out and I thought, gosh, what is that?
Yep, that's what it was. Went in to look at that lesion, took the forceps out, and Dr. Gupta found a worm, a larval form of a roundworm, not previously known to be a human parasite, Dr. Gupta. Worms commonly found in a breed of python. How on earth did it get into the woman's brain?
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. It's unusual on a few different levels. So these are, as you said, it's a roundworm, and roundworms are not that uncommon. It's a type of parasite that affects over 1 billion people around the world, but there are different species. This particular roundworm, as far as I know, has never been described in people. As you said, it's a parasite that mostly lives inside of snakes, inside of pythons. It's been found in small mammals, in marsupials like koalas, but never in humans. And making it even more unusual is that they live and hang out in the intestines. They don't tend to be in other parts of the body, though they can, and it's unusual. So what happens, and I think what happened probably in this case, in order to get this infection, you need to inadvertently consume the eggs of the roundworm. That's what sort of starts this cycle of the parasite living inside of you. And she lived in an area where there were carpet pythons, and she used to forage. So she's foraging for herbs and plants in the area, using that in her cooking, inadvertently consumed these roundworm eggs that are excreted in the feces of the python. And once those eggs get in, if they're fertilized, they find their way into the intestine and they form these larvae. And these larvae then burrow through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream. Once they're in the bloodstream, they make their way to various different organs, but particularly they make their way to the lungs as part of their life cycle, Heather. And what's usually really quite unusual about these parasites is that in order to mature, they have to get through the lungs, break through the blood vessels and into the airways, and they actually climb up our airways.
Oh my.
And are sort of coughed up or basically make their way back down the esophagus. So they come right up and then back down into the intestines to find their way back where they started. But having done that cycle, they can now mature into full adult worms, and that's where they live, and they hang out in the intestine. They can grow to over a foot. Some of these species, they can live for years, and they can consume nutrients. In kids, they can cause malnutrition just hanging out there and consuming nutrients as they come through the intestines.
Okay. You know what I'm hearing from my producer upstairs, Doctor? I'm not laughing at what you're saying. She goes, okay, only one more. We can only look at this. It is a bit revolting, is it not? But it is, I mean, it's absolutely mesmerizing, this. And why it's important, it's not just for the shock value of this. I mean, it's a jaw-dropper of a story. But the CDC, Dr. Gupta, tells us that 75% of emerging diseases in humans begin in animals. So this is an example of that kind of thing, how it can start, is it not?
Absolutely, and it's, we call it emerging in the sense that we haven't seen this particular species of roundworm in humans before, and it's what we call a zoonosis. We've talked about a lot of these in the past where you have an infection that's carried by an animal, and eventually as humans and animals interact, they start affecting humans, and it's whether it's from ticks, whether it's from mosquitoes. In this case, it's a parasite that's found in snakes. As there's more and more interaction between human beings and animals, as we encroach on their territory, on their habitats, and as the weather warms up and they move up to territories they're not used to being in and they can now survive in, we are seeing more and more of this.
You know, I personally have barely recovered from the earbug scene in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Dr. Gupta. So I am very happy to be able to have made it through this particular episode with you. It was fascinating. Thank you so much. I can see why so many people are just caught up in the story. Thanks, Dr. Gupta. See you next time.
My pleasure.